Like, it still makes me emotional thinking about how I felt in that moment. I was like, how could I deny Jesus? But in that moment, as I was crying out, saying, I'm so sorry, I'm so, so sorry, I felt like Jesus was there. And I know that sounds crazy, but I felt like he was standing right beside me, and he was saying to me, I'm here. I've always been here, and I love you. And that night really changed my life. It was the first time that I witnessed, without a doubt, the supernatural is real.
Well, thanks for tuning in to the Peaceful Presence podcast. And if you're new here, this is where you'll find spirit-led teachings, miracle testimonies, and real stories of faith that remind you that God is always present, even in life's hardest seasons. And if this kind of hope-filled content encourages you, please take a second to hit subscribe or follow. It helps reach more people who need these messages of faith and encouragement. Well, in this episode, I am honored to introduce you to Julie Hedenborg. Julie once wrestled with doubt about God's existence, but a powerful experience in the ICU and her own personal miracle changed everything. And her story is proof that even in the seasons of questioning, God can meet you right where you are and lead you into a new calling. Well, Julie Hedenborg, welcome to today's show. And I am just so grateful that you're here and willing to share several stories that I truly believe will deepen the faith of those who are listening. I heard your story on Liz Wright's podcast, and I have to say that what pulled at my heart the most wasn't just the miracles, although those are so powerful as well, but it was your honest wrestling with whether God was even real. And that raw place of questioning, I think so many people can relate to that, especially if they're walking through hurt or disappointment, or maybe somebody that they respected caused them to doubt. And what I love about your journey is just how God met you right where you were and brought you back to him. So maybe we can just start with that. You can tell our audience a little bit about yourself, take us back to that time in your life when your faith was shaken and when you doubted his existence, and then maybe walk us through how that changed.
I would be happy to, Olivia. It's an honor to be on your show, and I've really enjoyed. We've already connected and been texting for days. I feel like I know you.
I feel like we already had a whole podcast episode before the podcast.
Yes, I've really enjoyed it. So I'm just thankful to be connected. But yeah, I'd be happy to share my experience. I am from a sweet little town in it's called Lexington, Kentucky. It's thoroughbred capital of the world, a sweet little community that I grew up in. And I grew up in a Christian church. I wasn't necessarily a church that was heavy with gifts of the Spirit. We weren't talking about miracles. We weren't really I don't know. It was a sweet fellowship that we had. I was a young child, so maybe there were some people there that were operating in the gifts of the Spirit, and some people may not understand what that is, but it was just a simple, sweet church. And we prayed, we learned Bible studies, and we had potlucks in the gym. And it wasn't until about college that I had a professor that kind of led me to question everything. And it was a time in my life where I actually had some traumas that were happening simultaneously. And I think sometimes the devil kind of purposely gets you in this position where you may be on shaky ground. But I had this professor in my medical anthropology class who I loved, and he was like a grandpa, but he traveled the world, very intelligent, funny, witty, and I was a big nerd. I loved the class, and I would come early, and I loved talking to him, and I have a lot of respect for people with education too. And I didn't have a whole lot of people in my family that had the opportunity to go to college, and so I don't know, I loved that class. So one day during class, before class, he talked to me and told me that he was an atheist. And he said that people can't accept their mortality. And they really think that Jesus is like their modern day Santa Claus. And when we die, we go to the dirt and it's dark and there's nothing. And that really shook me coming from him. And it kind of led me into this place where I really began to question, and I thought, well, what if I grew up in a Muslim home, or what if I grew up in, I don't know, an occult home? Like, how do I know what I've been taught is true? How do I know? And the Bible's old. It's an old book. Like, it's been translated different times, and very carefully, by the way. But anyway, it's been translated many times. And how do we know for sure? And now I have a master's degree in science. So just by nature, I'm very logical. I like things that make sense. I like a system for things. And so for probably about 6 years, I was kind of in this weird place. It was a very lonely time in my life. I ended up going into nursing, and I ended up going into the ICU where I took care of open heart patients. So fast forward about, I don't know, 6 years or so, still kind of in this weird space. Um, I'm working in the ICU one night, and this man is a patient next to mine. I had a fresh open heart patient, and my patient was slow to wake up, but the guy next to me, every time I would go in and try to do neuro checks on this patient, I had to scream kind of loud because they're coming out of anesthesia. It's loud. And I would just say really loud, squeeze my hands. If you can hear me, squeeze my hands. And the guy in the next room would yell out, come on here, I'll squeeze you. Just like, and I came
Making
out
it kind of
in
fun.
my 20s. Yeah. And I was like, what? You know, and I look, I kind of peek in his room and he's just sitting there. I said, was that you? Like, he was hysterical. I don't know how he was so funny after having open heart surgery, but he was a hoot. And all night long, he was just making jokes and just being silly. And we were going back and forth. I'm like, I'm gonna have to call security. You know, we were just teasing. So in the middle of the night, his nurse, male nurse, he was like, yeah, I get the only male nurse anyway. He said, you know, they asked me to cover him for lunch, which was like in the middle of the night. And I said, sure. So I was in the middle of the hallway, and this guy he was trying to rest, but he was just a firecracker. But all of a sudden on his monitor, I'm standing in the hallway and I see on his monitor a critical arrhythmia. It's called VTAC. And in that moment, I knew when I looked at him, it was real. And so I grabbed the crash cart. I rush into the room to defibrillate him. His eyes are rolling back in his head as I'm going into the room, and his blood pressure drops, his heart rate. I can see it's a real code. And I yelled for help as I was going in the room. I defibrillate him. A whole code starts and he's out. I can feel with my hands there's no pulse. There's no blood pressure. His oxygen pulse ox is dead. Everything is reflecting no life. We did several rounds of CPR. There's different people coming in the room. Respiratory therapy. We're changing out compressions. I'm pushing drugs now. You know, in the code, we're changing roles. All these things were happening, and there were things happening on the outside of the room too during this. And we did several rounds of CPR. Well, at some point, he finally comes back out of just completely out of nowhere, and he opens his eyes and he looks at me. Right back into his comic mode. He's like, it's about time he came in here. That's the first thing he said. I was just like, oh my gosh, this guy. I said, what are you doing to us? He was just a riot. I've never seen a patient like this. Everybody slowly, he stabilizes out. Everybody starts to come out of the room, and his nurse was back. And I go to just touch base on my patient, who was fine. And I come back. I'm the only one in the room now. And I'm cleaning up the floor because during a code, sometimes like the tops of vials and different things, EKG strips will fly all around the room. And I was in the room cleaning. And he looks down at me as I'm in there. And he says, hey, he goes, I just want to say thank you. And I said, well, that's kind of what they pay me for, but you're so welcome. And I said, I'm so glad you're okay. He said, no. He goes, I don't think you understand. And I look up at him. And he said, I saw you. And so I'm thinking, well, he saw me when his eyes were rolling back. That was the last vision he had of me. And he said, no, because I saw everything. And he said, I was floating in the room. And he points, he was right there. He points to the bottom of his bed, to the top of the ceiling. And he says, I was right there floating in the room, and I saw everything. And he proceeds to tell me every single thing that happened during the code, things that were said, who rotated out of compressions, when I was pushing the drugs after I was first doing compressions. And then somebody, this tall guy in a white jacket, was squeezing a bag, helping me breathe. And he knew things, Olivia, that were happening on the outside of the room. And that is what really shook me, because part of my science mind was like, well, maybe there's some, hearing is the last to go in the brainstem, right? We know that. And I thought, well, maybe there's some residual level of perfusion somehow where he's still having some form of hearing. No, he knew things that I was able to verify that were going on the outside of the room that I didn't know was happening. And if you think about it, I thought, well, gosh, I guess maybe from this point in the ceiling, excuse me, this point in the ceiling where he said he was floating, he could see that. from there. There was a glass wall, but there were people standing all around him, a wall of people. So in that moment, I was in awe. And immediately it was like, my professor was wrong. We are spirits, 100%. We are spirits. And, I'm sitting there as I'm continuing to clean the room. I'm having this revelation. And of course I thanked him. I'm like, thank you for telling me that. Like, wow. I was kind of speechless. And in my mind, I'm thinking, holy cow, we're spirits. And he was going somewhere. And then it hit me. I've denied Jesus. Heaven and hell are real and Jesus. And I was like, I've denied Jesus, the one who died for me for how many years now? And my heart was just still crouching on the floor. I had my hair was kind of hiding my face, but I started to cry, and it was like, oh my goodness. And I started kind of crying out in my thoughts to Jesus. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Like, it still makes me emotional thinking about how I felt in that moment. I was like, how could I deny Jesus? And I didn't hear anything. I didn't see anything with my physical senses. But in that moment, as I was crying out, saying, I'm so sorry, I'm so, so sorry. And I felt shame and just so much remorse and heartache that I did that. And I felt like Jesus was there. And I know that sounds crazy, but I felt like he was standing right beside me. And he was saying to me, I'm here. I've always been here, and I love you. And in that moment, I just felt flooded with like, oh, I didn't feel condemnation. I didn't feel shame. It was just like, okay, he loves me. And that night really changed my life. It was the first time that I witnessed, without a doubt, the supernatural is real. And I would go on in my nursing career to see many other people, especially that first job I had, because I think we had a lot of codes because we did a lot of open heart cases. And even the good ones that are doing well can have this ectopy where they code, just as the heart is leveling out and things. It happens a lot. So we had a lot of codes, but it really changed my life. And I would hear people say things. Sometimes they would share with me. I've always been one of those people that it's like I have a sign, like, tell me your deepest secrets, excuse me. But, people would share with me like, look, I had an experience, or I would see people and one lady we had that we know she was close to death. And I saw her through the glass window. I had just come on the shift, and she had been oriented according to the nurse and was fine. But suddenly she's having she's all animated and there's no one in the room, and she's having this whole conversation. And I'm just like, oh, what is it? Morphine? What did she have? And I'm looking at her medical record thinking, okay, she's reacting to something or hallucinating, clearly, And then I saw she was due for something. So I went to get it, and I thought, I'll come back. So I come in the room and I go, and now she's acting fine. She's just in her bed. And I asked her, I said, so Miss Jones, I'm back. Just wanted to give you some medication. I just want to go through my routine checks. Can you tell me your name? Can you tell me where you are? Who's president? What year? Blah, blah. She cleared it all. Sharp, knew where she was. And I kind of looked at her and I thought, well, that's really weird. And I didn't want to embarrass her that I had seen her. I thought, I don't know what that was. Soon the family came to visit to say goodnight, and they come out and they said, you know what? She said that her sister was here. And I'm like, well, I've only been here since this time, but I haven't seen any visitors. And then shortly after, this woman passed away, and she was in her final stages. We knew she was getting close, so I've seen that too. So I know the supernatural realm is very real, but I think Jesus allowed me to have that experience to draw me back to him. I know there are people praying for me, and I think he knew what he had for me in the future. So, yeah.
So just kind of a practical question. And I had heard, I don't know if it was through listening to your podcast or your book too. I know you had mentioned, being in the medical field, that when people would, you had heard other people having these experiences, other patients having experiences, and maybe you or other nurses might say, oh, it's the operating light or whatever that it is that they're seeing. But in that example, why did those stories not convince you versus the one with the gentleman? Was it just because you had that personal connection there, that he was validating things that you were doing?
I don't think I was a newer nurse, so I didn't have a lot of people that shared those things with me. Um, it wasn't until I experienced it myself. But then I went to my mentor and I told her, her name was Karen, and I still remember she was great. And I told her what happened, and she was just like, "Oh yeah, it happens." And she said, "Well, have you seen a negative one yet? A bad one, bad experience?" And I said, "No, I've only seen the one." And so the older nurses typically would be like quick to share what they've witnessed. But then some of the other nurses, like you would bring it up and they would be like, "Oh yeah, well, the OR lights are really bright, or the room lights are really bright. That's the bright light people are talking about." So some people would reject it. But yeah, I hadn't really had I hadn't really had any experience with that before. And I hadn't heard any near death experiences at that point in my life.
Clearly, somebody seeing you in that moment and you were walking through that obviously made that so clear to you and something that you couldn't ignore personally, I would imagine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe walk us through, obviously you had a very successful and respected career as a nurse, but I know that you had your own personal miracle story that took place after that too. And I'd love for you to share and walk us through that as well.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. I loved being a nurse. It was great. And I ended up going back to anesthesia school out of the ICU and became a nurse anesthetist. And I practiced that for about 16 years. And I was really at about kind of what I consider the prime time in my life. I had 2 kids, 5 and 7, a husband. I had done my job for a long time. I was able to do just about any case, and I was kind of working part-time and heading into maybe doing some teaching maybe at some point, and life was really good. And there was one day I was working, and this is one of the moments you look back and you see that God was moving, and I didn't even know. But this was very significant. There was one morning I had a case. It was going really, really well. And I had intubated the patient. Everything was going smoothly. I was really like in the flow state, and loving what I was doing. And I turned to put my blade away. And I remember I put a towel over it, and I could still see the scene of what I was looking at. And I heard in my head and my thoughts, it was so strange. I heard, "This part of your life is over." And my heart sank. And it was a voice of authority, not angry, not just very clear, like, "I'm just letting you know you're done with anesthesia," is what it felt like. And I didn't know it was God speaking to me. I thought, what, did I eat something wrong? Like, why would I have this thought? And it just sank. I just had that pit in my stomach. Like, it wasn't like I had a stressful case where there have been times where I wanted it to be over because it was such a hard case. There are stressful days in anesthesia, but that wasn't it. And I couldn't get that thought out of my head. And I went home that night and I asked my husband, I'm like, why would I think that? That just doesn't make any sense to me. I love my job. Like, this is what I'm supposed to do. And it was probably months after that happened, and I joke in the book, like a good Christian girl would have said, "Oh, turning in my resignation. God's calling me to something new." I didn't even know he was talking to me. But anyway, yeah, I had an injury to my neck, and this was probably months after that happened. And I battle with scoliosis. I actually have a pretty severe curve. I'm technically disabled for my job right now. The doctors say that, but I just refer to myself being redirected by God to do something totally different. He can surprise you in that way. You might learn that too. But anyway, I had my neck adjusted by a chiropractor for my scoliosis. And I normally didn't do the neck adjustment piece. I stayed away from that because a lot of the PAs in the OR told me not to do that. But that day I had it like a kink in my neck. It didn't have pain. I just felt like it was just bothering me. So I went ahead and did it. And I believe that is what caused my 2 arteries to my brain, both vertebral arteries, to be dissected. And there was an aneurysm just below where he was working. I can't prove that without an autopsy, although it was the only thing that had happened. It's a known risk of the procedure, but thank God I don't have the autopsy to prove it. But I ended up in an ambulance, and I really felt like God told me. I was told to go to the ER because I was kind of blowing it off at first. It's not like I arrested in the treatment. I had pain when I left. I started having really bad pain. And this kind of injury you can arrest right in the office if you have this happen. Again, this is a rare thing, but mine was not that way. And I ended up going to the emergency room, and I knew something was wrong, but I had no idea how serious it was. And I know God led me there. And they did a CAT scan just to rule things out. And they had to get an ambulance. They were going to get me downtown. It was a big deal. I was in the ICU for 3 days, but in the ambulance, something really crazy happened. That is a big part of this whole journey. When I was in the ambulance, I was Googling, prognosis when I found out what was wrong, prognosis for bilateral vertebral artery dissection. And the first thing it said was, for those that survive. And so I just put my phone down and I just started to panic. And I heard the ambulance driver and the paramedic talking, and they said, we can't hit a pothole. We can't hit a bump. We have to make this a very smooth ride. And I knew what happens in that injury. Typically, a blood clot will form in the arteries. You can have what's called an anoxic brain injury, where the layers of the artery collapse and there's no perfusion to the back of the brain, or you can have a blood clot that just gets bigger and bigger. And I was having these little strokes that I didn't know were strokes. It was like little vision changes and things I was seeing that was very strange. And again, here I am, a nurse, just thinking, well, I need to eat something, and they were strokes that I was having. And the stroke, the clot can go straight to your brain and it can kill you instantly. And some people die from just one. And this side was really bad. They kept saying, wow, it's so impressive. And that's not what you want to hear when you get a CAT scan.
Mm-hmm.
You just want to be unremarkable. That's boring is what you want. So they put me on all kinds of blood thinners. They did all kinds of tests. But in the ambulance, in that moment, when I knew the severity and I realized, like, I might be meeting Jesus, I might not come home to see my kids, I cried out to God and I prayed. I said, God, I don't want to die. I want to go home to my family. And I said, Lord, please, I just let me share you with one more person. Let me share you with one more person, please. And I meant it with all my heart. And in that moment, he did give me a peace. And I remembered, something telling me to go to the ER. And it was like, okay, that's still with me, whatever that is, an angel or the Holy Spirit, I don't know. But I know I was protected in that moment. I thought, that's still with me now. And I did get through the ICU for 3 days, and I did not end up being paralyzed. I don't have permanent nerve damage. I don't have a feeding tube. Like, there's so many things that could have happened. And most people have a stroke and they recover at some point. Very few people with what I had have no effects. So I really believe that he completely protected me. And there were some God moments in the ICU, but that prayer, I would get out of the ICU and I would forget about that prayer. And I actually had a kind of a tough year, even though physically I kind of had I had a miracle. It was a total miracle. And when I left the ICU, Olivia, they did tell me, they said, for 30 days or 3 months or 90 days, they said you could still have a stroke and the aneurysm probably won't rupture. Like, that was so hard to hear. So I had pain. I had anxiety. I had some panic attacks. And I called the chiropractor when I left, and he was a really good guy, but I told him, I'm not litigious. Let me bring my records, and that you can use this to maybe help prevent this for somebody else. And he would not call me back. He wouldn't respond. I even offered my records to a place in DC where they do chiropractic research, and nobody, like, if I'm that rare, I would think they would. In anesthesia, we seek that out and we have meetings over it and we talk to people and we want to know and we want to improve. And so it was very difficult. I felt very overlooked and I had a lot of anger and bitterness. And then I ended up being told I'm disabled for my job. There were a lot of doors that closed, and it was a hard time. And I think it was 3 years before God actually let me know that it was time to start the podcast, which at the time I had forgotten all about that prayer.
Yeah. Did you, when you couldn't do your job anymore, did you have a recollection of going at that moment? Did you have a recollection of going back to when you heard that authority voice saying, this is over, this part of your life or this career is over?
Oh yeah.
So
I remember.
did it give you any peace in that
he's
moment?
He's closing the door for me because I couldn't do it. I felt like I worked so hard. I 8 years of college, a master's degree. Like, and I just didn't want to let it go, and I think growing up with parents that didn't have any money, it was like my security blanket. Like I wanted that financial security for myself. I wanted, no matter who I married, I wanted to know I can support myself. And so it was maybe it was a little bit of an idol. I don't know. I really thought that was really who I was, but he had to teach me along the last 7 years, my identity is in Christ and what that looks like. And he has blessed me in so many ways, even though I had to grieve losing that profession. I really loved it, but God had something so much better for me. And I guess one thing I do want to make sure that I share is that in that time where I was healing and I was dealing with the anger and the frustration and it was just a difficult time. I isolated myself. That was not the thing to do. Somebody wanted me to go into a Bible study. I didn't want to do it. I finally just went to just shut her up. And I remember they were studying Revelation. I was like, oh, great, the end of the world. Like, and they were all like, it's the revelation of Jesus. So I went and I didn't say a word. I had to dig out my Bible. I didn't even know where it was. All the pages were like sticking together because I never was in it. And God led me there to that place. And it took a year, but I finally forgave the guy. And I finally realized like the whole mission of my life is not to eliminate the world of neck adjustments. Because at one point I thought it was. It's actually to show people what God has done for me and that he was there with me in my mess when I was angry and crying out to him. Like I remember, and I always prayed like buttoned up prayers because this is God, we have to be like, and it was the first time in my life. Like I remember crying in my car one day after seeing an expert about my stuff, and I just lost it in my car. I don't know if anybody's done that, but I was bawling, and I remember I wasn't angry with God. I knew he had protected me, but I was so angry with the guy, and I felt just completely discarded. I felt upside down, and I just remember crying out to God, like, seriously, God, Romans 8:28, like, use all things for God. How are you going to use this? How are you going to use this? Like, I was so angry, and I didn't hear him. I didn't hear him at all. I think I was so caught up in my anger, and I knew I was supposed to forgive Olivia. And I said, Lord, please help me. And I remember one girl in my Bible study, when I finally would open up and talk about it, she told me, she just said, it's just a decision you have to make. She just very firm. And I was like, well, I felt like because I felt so angry, like by saying, well, I forgive, it's not really forgiveness because I'm not feeling it. How can you say that when you're so mad? And I would just cry out to God, God, please, I'm so mad. I don't know how to get through this. And I knew I was supposed to pray for the guy. So I would write, on a post, I would try to pray. And the first prayers were like so bad. Like I pray for him because I would pray. And one day it was like, it hit me like, maybe he feels so bad. Like he can't even face you. Like, and one day I was sitting in front of a church and there was a cross, and I felt, and I kept just praying, God, help me. I'm stuck. I don't know how, I'm just so stuck. And I felt like a voice, like I was looking at the cross. I was just at a red light, just sitting there. And I've heard a voice say, it was just an accident. I know it's hard, but it was just a bad accident. And I'm sitting there looking at the cross as I hear that. And I thought about Jesus on the cross, in the middle of the most heinous thing that's ever happened on earth, the one perfect person being crucified, the most unjustly unfair thing. And in the middle of it, he's saying, forgive them. He's offering complete forgiveness and crying out on their behalf as they're murdering him. And here I am stuck on this. Maybe it was a bad adjustment. Maybe there's still something about me that we don't know that caused this to happen. I don't know. I may get to heaven and Jesus may say, yeah, you had this thing and you didn't know. I don't know. But I couldn't stay stuck there. So God really did do a work through me. But the podcast came 3 years later. He led me to do that. And he wanted me to share my part and share the hard parts. And there is one more part about the forgiveness. I don't know if you want to hear this part, but after I wrote a text that year, after a year, and I realized like I surrendered my life completely. That was something I did want to tell you. It took a lot, but I had never fully surrendered my life as a Christian to Jesus. I always put caution tape around Jesus. And it was like, well, okay, only like the knotted Christmas lights. Here you go. Like I I wanted stuff. I wanted some stuff for me to go the way I wanted it. And I didn't let him have all the parts of my life. And then I surrendered the dating part. And I actually said, okay, I'm just not meant to be married. And 3 months later, I think I met my husband, and I still wouldn't even go out with him because I still didn't think it would happen, but I surrendered that part. So it took this whole thing for me to fully, finally surrender my life to Jesus. And when I did that, I remember crying through tears, and I was just so grateful to be alive. And I was like, God, you've had so much grace for me during this ugly year of my life. You've been with me the whole time. I love you. You've healed me. You've given me another chance at life. Like whatever time I have left, use me. I give you all. I give you everything. I remember crying,
Mhm.
looking down at my wedding ring through tears, and even saying, even though it's not like this huge rock, but like it's sentimental. And I said, I will sell this ring and go to Africa and feed the poor. Like I'll do whatever you want me to do. And I didn't have, like, some people had this supernatural experience where there's a gush of wind and all these things. I didn't have that. I just felt a peace come over me. And then slowly but surely things started to really change in my life. And yeah, being called to the podcast years later, now I realize it was an answer to my ambulance prayer. And he has sent the testimonies that I've shared in places I would never dream, in numbers I would never dream. And how it's usually not even anything I'm saying, it's usually the guest, but like it's blown me away. It really has. And I just want people to hear the value of, have you truly surrendered everything to him? And when you
Yeah.
do that and you're obedient in what he calls you to do, whatever that looks like for you, for me, it was this, for you, it's something different. But when you're obedient and you let him lead you, he can do things through you that you can't even begin to imagine.
That part was one of the it was in your book, and that was one of the parts that I even made a little note of, and that struck me because I think you had said that up until that point that you realized that you only had invited Jesus into the areas of your life that you felt were beyond repair. And I think that's such a normal, natural thing that many of us do, whether it's out of, fear or control or just not knowing, what to do. It's like we think we're in control of this part, and then we'll turn over this part to God. And that was really powerful for me to hear you say in your book, because I think that is where God's bringing us. And as I listen to you share your story again, it's like evident now with perspective that all of these things were happening for you, to bring you to where you are now and what you're doing now. And it probably couldn't have happened any other way for you to give up that control and surrender.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I want to add one last thing on the parking lot bawling session that I was talking about. Um, there's someone right now that's in a place that's really hard, and you're not hearing God, and you're feeling like, where are you? Like, what's going on? Why are all these things happening in my life? It's not fun. It's very hard. I think it was a few years later. This is really interesting. I had to take my kids to be tested at this facility, and I ended up parking, and I had to wait a while. And so I checked my ministry mailbox and my YouTube comments, and people had been emailing me and telling me how God used some of the episodes, and it was very amazing. Some of the feedback I was reading as I'm sitting in this parking lot waiting, and as I'm sitting there, I'm almost in tears at like what one girl was like wanting to hurt herself. Like it really, she felt like this testimony saved her life. Like, and this is all God doing this. It's not me. Just the responses I was reading were very powerful. And as I sat there and very emotional, I realized I was sitting in the same parking lot. I had come in a different way, and I was sitting almost in the exact spot where I had been broken down and crying out to God. How are you going to use this? How are you going to really, how do I see
Oh,
Romans 8:28 here? And I'm sitting there and I'm reading this and I'm realizing, I'm like, oh, this kind of looks familiar. And then I was like, oh my gosh. And then it hit me. And I was like, oh my gosh, he's
full
answering my prayer.
circle.
He's answering my
Totally.
prayer.
I
And
love
so
that.
I just want you to know God sees you. He sees you. He's with you. Um, he can handle your ugly parking lot prayer. hopefully you can find someone to kind of be with you, and don't isolate yourself, but he's with you. So I just want to give you hope, because that was really cool. That day that happened, it was like, oh, he did hear me. He did hear me. He is using it. And it was in a way I could never imagine. So I hope that
Yeah,
gives
I
somebody
mean,
hope.
I can just see through you, how God is using you. And it's just such we spoke earlier, and, the joy radiates out of you, and even your expertise, in the medical field, there's a lot of people that have a hard time believing in miracles or another realm. And I can see you being a bridge to so many. So let's pivot a little bit and talk about your podcast. And now you also have a book titled the same, The Everyday Miracles, and maybe share a little bit about, you're sharing testimonies and stories through your podcast and through your book as well. But maybe share a little bit about what you're doing and how that's inspiring people. And even if there's been some common threads that you've heard through these stories that have further strengthened your faith.
Oh, absolutely. Each testimony is amazing. I have 32 miracles. Some of my top miracles are in the book. As far as like the common threads, all through the book, one thing I love is that these are not faith giants. These are just normal people. And there are all kinds of different people. There's a few that are children. There's one, I will share a few, but first I'll talk about the threads. But the power of prayer, oh my goodness. You're going to be blown away. And the way God speaks to people, you're going to see and hear how he speaks in all different ways to different people. He's still speaking to us today. The power of a mustard seed of faith. There's that theme in a couple of them. The power of someone else that loves you, the power of their faith and their love and prayer for you. There's a paralyzed man who was healed after 10 years of unilateral paralysis. And it was really, he did have faith in the beginning, but he didn't come from a church where they really believed in modern miracles. And he was a police officer hurt on the job. He broke his neck and he was paralyzed on one side of his body. His one hand ended up being what we call contracted, where the muscle, you've seen people that have disabilities where their muscles kind of atrophy, and that doesn't really undo. He had a really rough 10 years. And Olivia, he got to the point where he was tired of people praying for him. He was having migraines, muscle spasms. At one point, he had multiple surgeries. And at one point, he was going to be totally paralyzed. And he ended up just staying with a unilateral paralysis. He was able to get an amazing brace for his leg that was a mechanical type brace, very high technology, where he would basically drag his leg off the bed, put it in the brace, and turn the brace on, and he was able to walk with the brace, which was really amazing. But his wife, Meg, was insistent had the faith that he was going to be healed, and she bribed him to go to the healing conference. She said, it's your birthday. It's Christmas, it's Mother's Day, and if you just go, God's going to heal you. And she just kept standing on that. And he was just like, oh, that's a pretty good deal, so I'll go. And he ends up being completely healed. And it's on video. He's in that movie that CBN just did. It's about the supernatural, and it's about miracles. Brian and Meg are in that, and they share it on my show for the first time because it was during COVID. Nobody could go anywhere. So I felt so honored that at first I was just like, you got to be kidding me. Like, do you have medical records? And they showed me video, and it's so neat because I'm interviewing him and he's talking with his hands and I'm like, not many people understand just the miracle that I saw video of his hand when it was crazy what happened. But I love that he was just a normal guy, and her faith really got him there. Now he did play a role. And when he was at the event, he goes, something was happening, something was shifting in my spirit, and I could feel the bitterness leave and the unforgiveness. And he saw the glimmer. And then at the end, actually, when they were calling out at the end, he told Meg at dinner, he started opening up to the idea, okay, maybe I will go up for prayer. And he told her at dinner, he's like, I'm going up. And she was so excited. And at the end of the night, when they have the time where they call people up, and they called everything out except for what Brian had. And he was just like, oh, it's happening again. And Meg, even this is not in the book, but Meg told me, she's like, I was so mad. I went to the bathroom. I was like, seriously, we've come so far. And she just knew it was going to happen. And at the end of the night, people were leaving and they said, okay, if there's anyone else, we have our prayer team over here if you'd like prayer, which feels like such a consolation. You go for
Right.
this anointed
Right.
person. I mean, God can heal you without a person or not, but they went for this person. So Brian, like he said, something just made him like get up. Like he said in the interview, he heard a voice, but I think in the movie, he said something just made him get up, and he stood up and he walked forward, and then he heard turn left, and he looked, and there was a young girl standing there. She prays. He comes up and she's like, well, what do you need prayer for? And he's like, well, it's my neck. And he said, as soon as this is a New Jersey cop. He said, as soon as her hand touched my neck, he's like, I was just out. He fell to the floor. He's like, I was just feeling peace and colors, and he was just out. And then he kind of came to, and he said, when I woke up, she asked me, she's like, well, can you do anything you couldn't do before? And he said at that moment, he looked at his hand, and he's had some fingers move. And he said that had never happened in years. And he knew when he saw that, his faith rose, and he's like, get the brace off. Like he was on fire. His faith just shot up, and he ends up walking out of there, leaving the brace, I mean, just absolutely amazing. And they were in shock when they left. Meg said, we're going to be dancing in the streets. And they were both just in total shock. Like he just walked out of there.
I
And
remember
the
hearing
next day
that.
they go to thank the young lady. And she said, what's weird? She goes, a couple months ago, I had a vision, and it was a man's hand like this, and I didn't know what it was. So it's like, oh, that was planned ahead of time. God is so strategic.
Yes.
So there's so many stories in the book, but yeah, there are miracle after miracle, different types of people. Yeah, I could talk all day on those, but I really, more than miracles, Olivia, I want people to see Jesus in this book, that he loves you. He's more than miracles. He's more, it's great, wonderful if we get a miracle, but this life is like a vapor, right? We have eternity. We can have a relationship with him. And that may sound weird if you haven't had that before, but he is with us. He's in us. He loves you so much. But I want people to know, I want people to connect their hearts to him. And there's a section in the back of the book that talks about, there's a decision. If you want to make a decision to follow Jesus, I can guide you through that. There's steps to grow your faith. And there's journal areas just to think about after each testimony, kind of reflect on your own life, whether it's about forgiveness or deliverance. There's 2 that are demonic, actually, that are powerful, that are really have happy endings. But, it's a real thing that we face too in this world.
Yeah, I love that. I remember that story, and I was going to say, but you shared it at the end. Like, I remembered how they went back to her and she had said she had that vision. So I'm excited to watch it. I love this kind of stuff. And I think it just only confirms and inspires people. I mean, we're just in this busy, noisy world, and there's so many distractions. And I think at the core of us, that we're hungry to see this kind of stuff. We want more of the supernatural, and it's just really exciting to know that these stories exist, and so grateful that you're sharing them to the masses. And I just think it's only going to encourage, and for those that doubt, maybe this just plants a seed of, well, what if? And that seed can grow. When you talk to people about, having a relationship with Jesus, and I always think from the point of a viewer that's maybe just like, okay, what are they talking about? Like, what does that mean to you now? Because I know you started with a church upbringing, and then you obviously doubted for a while the existence and if it was real. And then now you've come full circle, and you've seen, not only through your own story, but all of these other people's stories. How has your relationship changed, and what does it mean to you to share with others about having a real relationship with him?
Yeah, I think years ago I wouldn't have understood it either. I think as I prayed and trusted, and as I got into the Bible, it just started to deepen, and I can sense his presence. There are things that happen during the day, every day. Not every day. If I'm not connecting to him, I can have days, if I'm just doing my own thing and be like, oh, he's not, I don't hear him, or that's really me being distracted because he's always there. Just like I heard him say when he was in the ICU that day, he was there. Um, I think, even like you'll, things will start to happen as you grow, even like knowing certain things and being prompted to go and say something to someone that feels so uncomfortable, and then witnessing what God can do through a simple, encouraging word. And someone will say, how did you know I was going through this? Or how did you, it's exciting. That is walking with the Holy Spirit, and right now, as you know, my father is very ill, and we were told yesterday that it could be much shorter than what we thought. And I did get emotional for a moment, but right now I just have a peace that I would not have if I did not have faith in my life. My goodness, even watching the news this last year or two, the last couple of years, I don't know how anybody does it without Jesus, because you can find this place of joy and peace. Truly, truly find it. When you have a relationship with him, that's what he offers. So it's different. It's a whole different life walking with him. It's hard to explain, even the little things, there are lots of little stories I could say, but even sometimes I have dreams now where he'll show me things, and sometimes they happen. Sometimes that directs you how to pray for someone. But yeah, I think reading the Bible is the best way to hear his voice, and I know that sounds like homework, or maybe some people look at the Bible like, oh, it's a book of rules. I think it's a survival guide. It's a love letter. It protects us. It tells us what to avoid. And we need that in this day, to have discernment and wisdom. But yeah, I think that example with my father, the fact that I can have peace right now, even though things are scary, that's part of walking with Jesus, because he is peace. He is joy. And it's different
So,
because he's with you.
yeah, I can so vouch for that. I've shared my own story, but my sister passed away from cancer, and we had a 2-year journey. And at the very beginning, when she was first diagnosed, it was really bad, and I was full of fear. I mean, she lived across the street from me. I would cry every night. And then one night in the middle of the night, I woke up, I'm like, no more. And I know who to go to. And anyway, these 2 years, I really just rooted in God, and I changed. And I didn't change because it was a legal thing to do. It wasn't like, oh, the Bible says this, do this. It was because I wanted nothing more than like miracle stories and testimonies and good news. I didn't want to, I joke that I used to fall asleep to Dateline every night. Like, that's how I put myself to bed. And at the end, we didn't get the outcome that I really believed we were going to get, but I did have a peace. And I know that came from, rooting in God and taking out all of the noise. And so I can completely vouch for that. And I think anybody that wants to grow closer to God, and all of the, terms or the Bible seems intimidating, I think it just starts with just telling him that, like, I want to grow closer to you, but I don't really know how. And maybe it's through stories like you're sharing, and just starting to listen to those and open your eyes and your heart to the miracles and the power and the supernatural that I really believe is meant to be the everyday, that's here and among us, is just a kind of a fun way to start. Just, there could be, you could think this way or you could think this way. Why not think this way and have fun with it,
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to paint the picture that Christians are guaranteed miracles. That's not what I'm trying to say at all. I don't know what's going to happen with my father. There are moments, and obviously getting the news was very distressing. We all broke down, and it was very hard to hear initially when we found out, but it just looks different. The whole experience looks different because he's with you, and he is a comforter. It says that in the Bible. He wants us to bring our cares to him. He cares. So I think just going it with him looks different, regardless of what the end comes. He actually told us we're going to have trials and hard things that we face here. But there's a purpose in all of it.
Yes, and you're walking an example of that, and I love that. What about people listening? You touched on this a little bit before, but what if they're feeling, they're feeling like they're in a season of doubt, maybe angry with God? What would you say to somebody who feels like maybe their faith has slipped through their fingers, so to say?
That's a good question. I was there for a little while. I'm sorry whatever you're going through. I'm sorry that it's happened. It may feel unfair, unjust, and it's hard. But I think you got to just keep talking to God, even if you feel like He's not there some days. Keep praying to Him. Keep coming to Him with everything you're feeling. I would tell you not to isolate yourself, because I know when I did that, I felt like things got darker. We're supposed to be in community, and it was so bad. I really hid from people, and because I just felt like I'm not in a good place. I don't know how to be cheery and Miss Miracle podcaster that I am now. I wasn't that person back then. And God actually sent Carla to me, and she was like, no, I need hours for my life coaching. You're helping me. And I kept telling her, I'm like, Carla, you don't want to listen to me right now. It's not good. And she was like, please, you're doing me a favor. So I was like, oh, God bless you. And, that was there, and I vented a lot of stuff. I said words that were not in the Bible I'm not proud of. I had to process a lot of things, and she helped me so much. But I just pray that you would find someone to talk to. If you can get into a Bible study, it was life-changing for me. I didn't want to do it. Honestly, she just kept pushing me to do it. You got to find the right group too. Some groups, even support groups, I've talked to people who are going through grief, and they're like, this group actually was bad for me because there were too many negative people in there. Like you might have to do some work to find a place or a safe person to talk to about what you're going through. I would highly recommend that, not to isolate yourself, but keep praying, keep talking to God, and keep believing for healing, whatever you're going through. There is a resolution that can happen. And ask God, what are you trying to teach me in this? Is there something in this that you're cultivating in me? Like, just know that He's with you.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Quick question. Have you ever gone back to your professor?
I've looked for him. I know he's retired. I wanted to send him a book. And I still really I just loved his personality.
I know.
He was very loved at University of Kentucky, and I'm trying to find him. He talked about Ann Arbor, Michigan a lot. And, usually guys, you got to be careful what you put on social media. I can stalk someone on social media to get a testimony. I mean, it's all out there. But I've gone on LinkedIn. I did find him, and I wrote to the college and I said, if there's any way I can get an address to send him a gift. He was a professor that I loved, and I've not heard back. So I'm praying about that God will lead me to him, because I'd love to send him a copy.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to think about how to say this. My mom and I always say, you have the positive thing that comes out of this, and you can't have that positive symbol without the negative circumstance. So, I just see that the two work together as the whole, if that makes sense. You have the naysayers and you have the believers, and there's a union in that can come together. And it's not that one is bad and one is right or wrong. But it's just like the power of togetherness and coming into a union. I'm not probably articulating that very well, but I just see purpose in both, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
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 Well,
I do think I grew a lot during that time. It was painful.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to do it again, but it all, God used it all. He did.
Yeah. Yes. It's the strengthening time. Well, where can people go to find you, to find your podcast, to get a copy of your newest book?
Oh, well, everydaymiraclespodcast.com is my website, and I'm on YouTube, I'm on Spotify, I'm everywhere podcast wise. So my YouTube channel, you get to see the video, and I did hire someone to kind of help make my videos a little bit more fancy, but yeah, I do pretty well on there. Most people, my numbers have dropped a little bit lately, but yeah. And yeah, my email is everydaymiraclespodcast@gmail.com. So if you have a miracle or something you want to share with me, you can reach out.
Perfect. And the book is on your website too, or we
It's
can
on
put
Amazon. Yeah.
Amazon.
I'm
I'll make
still
sure
not
to
a
put links.
salesperson. I'm showing our start. Yeah, the
Oh,
book is
well,
on Amazon.
it's an amazing book, and I listened to it through Audible, so I was able to listen to it. And I love hearing testimonies, and like they say, you overcome with the blood of Jesus and the word of their testimony. So I think testimonies really speak to heart. So I gravitate towards those and love sharing them as well, and been so grateful and honored to share yours today. So
Thank you, Olivia. I love what you're doing. Just keep doing the good work.
thank you. Thank you for being here and being the light. And I've enjoyed getting to meet you and chatting with you even before this recording, and excited to stay connected with you. So thanks for being here. And thank you everyone for tuning in. Please remember to like, share, subscribe, and follow. Have a great day.